Okay, this is a big day because it's been a while for the What If You're Wrong podcast. Few questions about like, is it over? It was a summer hiatus, and we're back. And with a very exciting guest who is a longtime friend of mine. Welcome, Ben Sheehan.
Thank you for having me. And I'm really happy to hear that you're back.
Thank you. Well, I admire you very much, and I am a big fan of your mind and how you see the world. We've been friends for a long time. And let me just tell a little bit about who you are. You are so many things, but to me, in my mind, the first thing you are is very funny. You worked at Funny or Die for many years. You created a lot of really funny political content. But for the past few years, I feel like you sort of got drafted into this space. And maybe if the country hadn't taken a hard right turn, you might have been doing something a little more lighthearted. Like your community is a lot of comedians. Your wife is one of the funniest people I've ever met, and has an amazing one-woman show.
Thank you.
How to Get a Second Husband, it's called.
That is correct. It's a Tony Robbins style seminar on finding your second husband.
Anyway, check it out if you want to laugh your ass off. So, but where you went is you wrote a best-selling book on the Constitution, which does not, it sort of sounds impossible. You have shown this real commitment. I think you spent many years where it wasn't obvious that there might be such an audience for something like the Constitution. And there was, and it kind of blew up. You're now hosting the show for PBS, Civics Made Easy, and you're doing a million things. But really, you've also earned really a reputation, I think, on social media for explaining in clear terms things that are going on. And there are plenty of journalists sort of just covering the news, but what the insight that you bring that I think is so valuable is how does this relate to the laws that govern us? And how can we understand what's happening in the news based on like what the law is and what the Constitution says? So, when I was thinking about how I wanted to come back from a little bit of a hiatus, I think the country has changed, right? Many, many times in the last few years, but the assassination of Charlie Kirk does feel like a watershed moment where the country is different now than it was before. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that and just cover really this moment in general, free speech, the two parties, the various sort of ideologies that live inside both parties, who our future leaders are. We're going to kind of talk about all of that. But anyway, I'm very happy that you're here. So the questions that I put this out to my audience on Instagram, and I think what a lot of people are wondering on the left is we now know that much of what Trump and the administration are doing, it's been over 6 months since they've been back, is straight up illegal. For instance, the border czar accepted bribes. The FBI investigated this and knew about this and did not bring the investigation forward or refer it to the Department of Justice to press charges because he's on their team. In any prior administration, this would have been an all-consuming scandal with a special prosecutor. It probably would have implicated Trump. There would have been calls for him to step aside. And this border czar guy would surely be facing jail. Why is it that, obviously norms have shifted. He's very popular. The base loves him. But how did we get to a place, do you think, where people in the administration can commit crimes with no with no consequences?
Because in the past, there really haven't been punishments for it. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the first impeachment of President Trump was over a pretty clearly implied bribe, right?
Yeah.
If you give me dirt on my political opponent, I can help you with funding and defense. So I think that I think what Trump is really good at is finding leverage points. And I do want to be clear, like some of this stuff I do think is illegal and certainly unconstitutional, but a lot of it is also just, it's kind of a gray area. Mm-hmm. So like one thing that I think he does a lot of is he'll declare, there are emergency powers that can be unlocked for a president.
Yeah.
And so he'll declare something an emergency, but it's not clear in the law, like who verifies that it is an emergency. It says in an emergency situation you can do this, or you can have apply tariffs, or you can send in the National Guard. And so he finds these sort of leverage points to unlock power and basically do that. But is it the president that has the ultimate call of the emergency? Is it a judge? Like, he finds these sort of gray areas and exploits that. I don't think it's just him. But the point is that people aren't really being held accountable in the past. And I think that this presidency, both the first term
in
and
the past, with respect to Trump, right? Like,
yes, sorry,
this
with
could not have
respect,
happened
yes.
in the Biden years or the Obama years.
Because I don't think people, Trump doesn't come from politics. He comes from the real estate world, which is really messy and very transactional, and kind of like you scratch my back, you scratch, I'll scratch yours. And I think the way that he approaches governing is kind of mafia like.
Yeah.
And he was, came up in New York at a time when the mafia was involved in real estate. And I think
Sure.
a lot of his, approach to business is just finding points of leverage that people who come from government never would have thought to, put their finger on.
So this next couple of questions, I think you think of them as rapid fire. Don't overthink it, but just your quick takes on what do you think what's the thing that has pleasantly surprised you the most? Like, has there been anything good that the Trump folks have done that you're like, oh, I actually kind of agree with that?
There is something that I've been really, really happy about, and I want to give credit to RFK Jr. for this, is that a few days ago, he held a consortium of some of the leading minds when it comes to long COVID on finding a solution going forward.
Okay.
The Biden administration did put over $1 billion toward Recover, which was a plan to try to get, treatments for long COVID. I'm somebody who has long COVID, so I follow this very closely. And that money kind of got wasted on trials that either didn't get set up or didn't have any real conclusions. And a few days ago, RFK Jr. and HHS held a roundtable with leading experts from Mount Sinai, from Yale, all long COVID specialists across the country. And these are like the Avengers of long COVID people to find a path going forward, because there are members of the government who have it. I mean, Todd Young, a senator from Indiana, has long COVID. Tim Kaine has long COVID. And Roger Wicker, I don't believe, has long COVID, but supported Todd Young. And so I do hope that translates into more government funding for trials, or even trying drugs that are already approved for things like HIV, to see if they can also help long COVID. So I want to give credit to what it seems to be RFK Jr. is doing to get more focus and attention on long COVID. Also, his son suffers from long COVID. I do think that, if we're talking about the ends and not the means, it is very clear that illegal immigration is way down. Obviously, we can get into the tactics that were employed to get there and the things that have happened in places like Los Angeles, where we're recording this. But I guess I'll start by saying that I think what has happened recently with regard to long COVID, I'm really optimistic about.
Okay, cool. And what is your number one concern? What's way worse than you were anticipating?
The speed at which norms are being broken. And I think that this also translates to the existing checks that exist among the other branches just not being wielded. I would have never expected Congress to be this subservient to a president. I would have never expected the courts to not only be subservient, but to act to take away their own power as a check. The famous, recently famous case is what happened with birthright citizenship, where the Supreme Court heard a challenge to it, but it wasn't a challenge to whether the executive order was, unconstitutional. It was a challenge to whether or not a district judge can issue a ruling that takes effect for the whole country, rather than the party in the lawsuit before them, or people in their district. And the Supreme Court ruled that it doesn't take effect nationally. It takes effect either for the people before the court or people in the district. So they're weakening the power of their own branch.
Yeah. It is. I agree. Let's pivot a little bit to, because the most questions I had were also about like the Democrats. And so I think,
I just want to say this show has been hilarious so far. So I'm glad you teed me up as a comedian.
well, you still have a chance to make people laugh.
Really hope so.
Or we can get Jackie in here.
Okay.
The Democrats are in shambles, like in utter disarray. So one just quick anecdote. I happened to be in New York a few days ago, and I was invited to the opening night of the Metropolitan Opera. crowd filled with New Yorkers. You would imagine them to be probably a lot of Kamala Harris voters in there, not very many Trump voters, I think, at the opera. I could be wrong. But Chuck Schumer came out on stage and said, I want to welcome you all. I'm really proud of the bill we did in COVID where we preserved the arts. And before he could even get through his first few lines, he was roundly booed. And he was shocked. You could tell he was really taken aback. He was expecting a friendly audience. I mean, the guy was booed loudly. And everyone, people who aren't booing are kind of like, oh, wow, this is kind of a surprise. And so he tries to keep going. He's like, the attacks on the arts are unprecedented. And somebody in the audience is like, well, fucking do something about it. And so I think that encapsulates where everyone sort of is in the base, and like Senator Booker, who we love doing like the filibuster, gave the party some, maybe people thought, okay, we have a little fight in us. Can you, in your opinion, or with your expertise, like we don't have any statutory power right now in Congress, right? We are the minority in the House of Representatives. We're the minority in the Senate. We don't control the executive branch or the judicial branch. We have no power. So what do you think is reasonable for the average Democratic voter, the base of the party, to expect from the leadership of the party right now?
Well, really quick, just to clarify, some people say that it was a filibuster. Some people say it wasn't. But a filibuster technically has to be used to block a specific thing. So it was a floor speech, and then he followed it up with like fundraising pitches. So, but they're
pretty damn impressive to not pee for like 15
hours. It is very impressive. In a recent episode we did on the filibuster, I interviewed a former senator named Alphonse D'Amato, who was responsible for the longest filibuster of any living senator, current or former. It was 23 hours, 30 minutes.
He's alive.
He's alive, yeah. Yeah, this was in I want to say it was either in the late 80s or early 90s. He had this filibuster. The longest ever is Strom Thurmond in 1957 who opposed the Civil Rights Act.
But Corey's was longer than Strom's.
Corey's was a longer speech, but there's arguments over because it wasn't to block a specific thing. Anyway, your question was what again?
That what is reasonable for the base of the party to expect from our leaders when they're not in power.
Right. So there is one thing that the Democrats in the Senate can do, which is obviously the filibuster is still in effect. Yeah. And so there are a lot of things that are exempted. So, in 2013, Harry Reid got rid of the filibuster for lower level judicial nominees and for cabinet nominees. Mitch McConnell in 2017 got rid of it for Supreme Court justices. So I do think that's why you see arguably more controversial, extreme people who are on the Supreme Court or in the cabinet, is because we no longer have the filibuster for those things. You don't need 60 senators, you just need a majority.
Yeah.
And so for the things that are still required to have the filibuster, Democrats can still withhold their votes.
Yeah.
But there's always the chance for the Republicans to pull something which is called the nuclear option, which is one of the dumbest things in our politics, which is basically you need 67 senators to formally get rid of the filibuster in total, but you can reinterpret the rules around the filibuster with a bare majority. So let's say a senator introduces a bill and says, I want to have a vote on it, and somebody stands up to filibuster, and then they can say, well, we only need 51 votes to override a filibuster. Yeah. And the person running the Senate will say, actually, it says here you need, 60. And if you want to get rid of it, 67. And so then they can challenge it and put it to a vote. So you only need a majority vote in the Senate to reinterpret the number 67 as 51 or the number 60 as 51.
And everyone's been threatening to do that for years. And so far,
I
think everyone knows you're going to be in the minority again.
Right. But we just saw the Republicans do this for a mass confirmation at the same time of 48, people to the executive branch.
Yeah.
And so I think that, this is the last piece of leverage. But if the Republicans just start using the nuclear option over and over again, which again, you need a bare majority, then that does take away the last real check that the Democrats have, power-wise. They can do stuff like draw attention to things, or they can, open investigations or announce they want to do stuff. But if we're talking about actual firm power, it's the filibuster while it still lasts.
What do you think is the biggest, sort of related to that?
At the federal level, there's stuff at the state level that people can do.
What do you think is the biggest mistake Democratic leadership is making right now, or like the party in general?
I think that Democratic leadership doesn't understand that we don't live in the world that most of them came up in. You know, they're a lot of these leaders are from, you know, the 90s, the early aughts, and we just don't live in that world anymore. We don't live in that world with media. We don't live in that world politically. And I think that there's some hope that once Trump is gone, we're just going to return to norms and ordinary behaviors of how things used to be. And that's just not true. And I will say the biggest mistake that I think could prove catastrophic is failing to invest in the new media ecosystem.
Yeah.
Because newspapers, television networks, radio does not have the power that it used to have. And Republicans understood this by necessity because they didn't have control of those things. They had to create alternatives. Now they had, like, you know, Rush Limbaugh.
And because they didn't have any celebrities who supported them, but obviously that doesn't really matter.
No,
Kamala had LeBron and Beyonce.
People see celebrities and they just go, oh, a rich person is telling me to do something.
Right.
Like, great. So I do think that I would say the biggest mistake is for them to not take this seriously. And so out of necessity, the right started building this 15 years ago, and they have a huge head start.
That's right.
So it's just,
you and I have worked on some of the left's like response to this, and I think, you know, I agree with that assessment. And, you know, just the idea that we're still spending so much on like television ads where, you know, even my grandma knows how to fast forward those, right?
Yeah.
Who in your mind is doing it well? Who are the stars on the left? Who has learned the lesson? You know, are there 2 or 3 people that you were, you know, kind of put some faith in?
Very different styles, but I've been impressed with a few people. So I'll start in California. I do think that the way that Gavin Newsom has been, you know, adopting the style of Trump in his tweets and communications, I think is funny. I think it's broken through. I think, you know, saying that, you know, if Texas gerrymanders in one direction, we're going to gerrymander in another. I think people are looking for somebody who is not going to back away from a bar fight.
Yeah.
And he is definitely presenting him as somebody who's himself as someone who's not afraid of a fight. So I do appreciate that. Mm-hmm. I think James Tallarico in Texas is really, really effective at sort of simply leading people to sort of, you know, when he's on committee in the state house in Texas.
Yeah.
And he's been on Joe Rogan, and he's really gotten a large profile for somebody who's a state rep.
Yeah.
His performance on committees is really impressive, and I think the way that he speaks is just a very gifted communicator. He's a really deep person of faith, and I don't think you see that a lot on the left side of the aisle, at least openly in this way. In terms of like finding viral moments to break through, I think Jasmine Crockett's done a pretty good a job, and again, that's sort of somebody that people see as a fighter. And then I'll say that there's real value in just assuming that people don't understand how government works and explaining it. And obviously that's something that's close to my heart. But I think somebody like Jeff Jackson in North Carolina has done a really good job of just saying, here's what happened in the news, here's how it works, here's, you know, and just explaining. Because, well, this comes back to my work. We don't get civics education the same way that we used to. And so people are hearing the news, but they don't entirely understand how government works or like the context of it. And so anyone who's just using their platform to inform people and get people more educated on this, I think is a real value.
Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about this, just how the base of the party on both sides is sort of dominant in the way that is kind of new, right? You had this sort of centrist parts of the party that maybe were more powerful, you know, during the Clinton and Bush years. One of the lessons I learned from Trump was, you know, people talk a lot about in 2015 and 2016, the DNC putting its finger on the scale against Bernie Sanders and for Hillary Clinton. But people don't really talk about the RNC was doing that even harder against Trump. And they were really trying to make sure that he didn't win, you know? And when you think back and you remember like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz coming in second and third in some of those primaries, you know, if one of them had dropped out sooner, they would have been the nominee instead of Trump. Like it was not a slam dunk for him in 2016 to get the nomination. But the RNC kind of didn't matter because the base was so energized and like sort of revved up by this guy. And, you know, you can argue about what would have happened with the Democratic nomination in that year. But it is increasingly clear to me that the DNC is not making a major difference in how people see this moment, or I think it's not going to be the way that we claw back from the hole that we're in. And so do you see a real role for the national committees for either party?
I think you're seeing today fewer people identifying as Republican or Democrat than ever, and you're seeing a huge rise in people identifying as independent. Now, that doesn't mean that they're directly in the center neutral. Like, most independents
Sure.
lean to the right or lean to the left,
Yeah.
but people are refusing to affiliate or identify with a political party as an organization.
Yeah.
I think in 2016, what happened, you really saw a mirror image of two movements, right? You had the establishment Democratic Party, the establishment Republican Party, and then you had people running for president who were to the left of the Democrats, to the right of where the Republicans were, and one movement was successful and the other wasn't, power-wise, legislatively.
Yeah.
And so what's really interesting about it is I do think it has to do with the way that the parties were set up. So Democrats had super delegates, which before 2016 were able to vote in the first ballot at the convention for nominees. And then Sanders and Clinton struck a deal saying that we're going to change, I'll support you, but we're going to change the rules going forward so that super delegates don't get to vote on the first ballot. And that doesn't exist for the Republicans. They do have technically super delegates, but they had 3 per state, and those people were required to vote on the first ballot how their state votes. And then if no one gets a majority of delegates, they're sort of free to do what they want in the second round. So I do think that there was a more democratic process in place at the RNC than there was at the DNC at the time.
Yeah.
And that's not the only reason things turned out the way that they were, but it definitely had an impact. And
Yeah.
I think that you've seen the right wing remake the Republican Party in its image, and the left wing has tried to do that with the Democratic Party, but from a structural sense has largely failed.
So we have both worked in Hollywood on political stuff for many years, right? And I think we, as much as anyone can, understand how culture and politics have an interplay. We probably have a pretty good idea. What, do you think that what we are seeing is that politics doesn't drive culture, culture drives politics, and that's what's happening?
I absolutely think culture drives politics. And I think that politics is downstream from culture. I think culture is much different today than it was. I don't think celebrities have the same, traditional celebrities like film and TV stars don't have the same pull or sway that they used to. The culture now is online. It's YouTube stars, it's social media stars.
Yeah.
And those people have
Twitch, Discord.
Absolutely. And those people have real cultural power. And what's different about that is that it's really a two-way street. It's a parasocial relationship. You weren't messaging George Clooney. I mean, maybe a few people were, but you weren't like messaging George Clooney in the, 90s or the aughts, and he would get back to you or like your, like acknowledge receipt.
Yeah.
It was very much a sort of one-way street. There's celebrity and there's fame, and it gets sent to you through the traditional airwaves. Whereas today, if you can interact, 2 ways with Mr. Beast or with some large influencer
Or Hassan Piker.
and they'll acknowledge you. They'll take your question. It's very, there's a give and take. There's a two-way communication. And I think that builds a stronger bond with those creators. And that's the driving force in culture today. It's people on YouTube, it's people on social media, and it's not Hollywood. I think sports is a huge driver of it too, and I think music too, but film and TV does not have the power that it used to.
Yeah, but also didn't it feel like it didn't really matter that LeBron endorsed Kamala or Taylor Swift did? Like that didn't seem to me to really drive things in her direction in any way, but for Trump, having like random UFC fighters seemed to help. So it's like, I actually think the Trump campaign was much more strategic than people thought it was. For instance, one of the biggest campaign mistakes I think the Harris campaign made was not to entertain RFK Jr. at all. I mean, at his high watermark in polls, he was getting up to 20% of American voters. It's interesting to think about what that would have looked like. I think back in the summer of 2024, he probably wanted more. He's from the most famous Democratic family. I think if she had reached out and said, we'll find a place for you in my administration, that's a lot of voters. That was a big movement. And I mean, to just totally stiff arm it, I think Biden made a similar mistake in the first month or two of his presidency. He had an electric car summit and didn't invite Elon Musk, who, for all his flaws, I mean, I can't stand the guy, but he is electric cars in the United States and kind of around the world. He kind of made it happen. So then that radicalized him. He doesn't support Democrats anymore. And it's like, now look where we are. So to me, it's like, we got to get over ourselves a little bit and acknowledge that the people who have the real cultural power can help us win elections. And if we can't win elections, we can't, protect democracy. We can't help people who we care about.
There's a real, I have a, this is a pet peeve of mine, and I'll make the point I want to make in a second, but I do want to point out two cohorts that have been pointed to as the reason that Trump was successful in 2024. Marjorie Taylor Greene says that Maha moms are the reason that Trump won, and Susie Wiles, Trump's now Chief of Staff, says that it was Charlie Kirk helping to swing young men, not exclusively Kirk, but getting young men who are famously unreliable voters, famously people who can, I used to be one, you used to be one, we can be swayed, but they used social media and sort of male-centric spaces around finance, around sports, UFC. It
was brilliant.
Bro podcast, and it worked. It worked massively, and they did show up. And so those are two groups that I think had a real that Democrats could have messaged to and chose not to. Yeah. And I think that and I think it was really to the detriment. The pet peeve that I alluded to earlier was that you do have people who are working in these positions. Certainly not you, but other people who come from a sort of DC policy wonk communications background, who are like the liaison between culture and politics. Yeah. And these are not people who understand culture. They're usually people who grew up in, usually not, or people who grew up in DC who understand celebrity as it existed in the 90s, thinking that Taylor Swift or LeBron is going to somehow swing the youth vote. Young people look at them and go, okay, two well-known billionaires are trying to tell me what to do while I'm struggling to make rent. Yeah. Like, that's just not, that shit does not work anymore.
Well, I think the blessing of getting thumped so hard last fall is that, everyone knows that now. There's not going to be, millions of dollars spent on rallies with celebrities for our next nominee.
And we knew it in 2016.
We did.
I worked on an effort that literally used celebrity to get people to vote for Hillary Clinton. And it was mainly to get people to register to vote, but it was a partisan organization. It was on behalf of a well-known director. And the pushback that we got for using celebrity to try to convince young people was resounding. And it was very clear. And the fact that lesson wasn't then taken by other people and learned is deeply concerning.
Well, the other thing that's really concerning, I have a little more empathy for this because, when you and I were in college in the early 2000s, it was sort of like if you were a Republican on campus, it was like, are you okay? Like, why? Are you like Mormon? What's happening? And if you voted for George W. Bush in 2004, people were like, dude, like the Iraq War, like you were
depends on the college.
Yeah, but for the most part, it was not cool to be a Republican in college. For the most part. Okay. I mean, maybe in the South or something, but like... Yeah.
My wife voted for George W. Bush in 2004, and she has told me about that he was... I mean, also because Texas and Bush, but like at UT in 2004, it was like he was like a god, but whatever.
Yeah, okay. But for...
Your point is true for most folks.
But yes. What is... I don't think anybody could have conceived that in 2024, you would have a 79-year-old white guy against... I mean, what was Kamala Harris, 59 or something? Mm-hmm. This cool... a woman from Oakland who's like wearing Converse sneakers and like, is a historic vice president.
Yeah.
Like the idea that there would be that culturally it might actually be even cooler to support the old white guy. Like it didn't really occur to people as possible. So if the youth vote was absolutely taken for granted. I know you did some work on that and you were sounding the alarm. But what do you think that we need to do to get like young people back?
Like Democrats?
And not that it's like we don't have young people at all anymore. Like we still do, but we used to have such a massive advantage there. It was one of the ways we won elections. And the advantage has been erased.
Totally erased. I think that there is a huge difference between what Democrats think young people care about and what young people actually care about.
Yeah.
And a lot of the issues that were put forth as young people issues, and the past election, are things like climate change and gun violence and democracy, which never polled well for young people.
Yeah.
Most people don't even know what democracy is and couldn't define it, and they hear democracy and they go, oh, you're talking about the status quo. Well, the status quo sucks, so then I guess I hate democracy too. So these issues that are seen as like typical youth issues, but I was involved with a nonprofit that was a nonpartisan nonprofit that was active in doing focus groups across the country in 2024. And I watched these focus groups, and they took place in all sorts of different states with different groups of people. And the only commonality was that they were all under 30.
Yeah.
And every single state, it did not matter if we're talking to gay, straight, black, white, Asian, conservative, liberal, moderate, whatever, they all had the same concerns. And it was all money. And it was mainly rent.
Yeah.
Rent was the number one concern. It was cost of living, but chief among that was rent. And we had people who were in these focus groups who had just been homeless, who were worried about becoming homeless, who had friends who were homeless.
Right.
And this was like, it wasn't like it was a little bit of a miss. It was like young voters were screaming that they could not afford their lives, and they could not afford specifically their rent. And it took until Kamala Harris became the nominee a couple weeks in for her to sort of put together this very last minute, housing policy. But the evidence had been there for a long time. And
Yeah.
I just think that people have not been listening to the actual concerns of young voters. They just kind of hear it anecdotally, tangentially, and they just think, it's a values vote where young people give a shit about their money too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. To pivot a little bit, I think when Trump came back...
Is it funny yet? How are we doing? Is it good?
The country is in a hilarious moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you feel like laughing about it?
No.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's
I
tuning in to laugh, so pressure off. When Trump came back into power, I think a lot of people said the Democrats were about to have their Tea Party moment. To me, it does not feel like that is true. So the Tea Party, the roots of that felt quite racist to me, right? So like in 2009 and 10, it really just felt like the base of the Republican Party. I'm not saying that the entire Republican base is racist, but certainly a lot of what drove the Tea Party movement was anger that a black man had become president, smears and disinformation about his background, saying he was from Kenya or he was Muslim, he was not a real American. It was all quite familiar and, tropes to sort of delegitimize this guy who they just didn't feel comfortable being governed by. What happened, though, was it created a movement that made stars, and I think without it, you probably don't get Trump and MAGA. Why haven't we had that?
I think there was kind of a parallel movement at the time with like the Occupy Wall Street. Both of these movements, I think you can say that they certainly were a reaction to Obama, the Tea Party movement on the right. But it also was, I think what sometimes gets missed is that it was a little bit also of a reaction to a group of people, leaders in the finance world,
Yeah.
who were responsible for this massive fuck up when it came to the economy and risky bets, and were never held accountable.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like, corruption. And I think that's the moment where people were like, oh, wow, you can drop the ball this hard. You can fuck up this many people's lives and no one is held accountable at these large financial institutions.
Yeah.
Why should I have any faith that government is going to be a thing to solve problems if they can't even penalize the people? And I mean, we're about to see a birth drop in a few months or in the next year because of the fact, like colleges are not going to have enough. I don't really feel bad for colleges, but they're not going to have enough people to fill their freshman quotas because now the people that would have been born at that moment in the financial crisis are turning college age, and there's a big drop.
Yeah.
And so you're gonna see
people
this.
couldn't afford to have children.
Right,
in
exactly.
2009 and 10.
And I think that, these movements are sort of parallel responses. And absolutely, I don't want to discount that there was a huge racist response to the first, black man being elected president. But there also was a moment of clear corruption that everyone could see that hurt people. People lost their homes, people lost their livelihood, and no one was held accountable. And I think that was the moment for both right and left where they were like, fuck this.
Yeah, but it's interesting, it's the beginning of the Obama administration, right? Sort of famously, he had to work with Bush on the rescue during the transition. And there was real appetite among Obama and the senior leadership of that administration to go after people for a time. And then it was just sort of like considered to be too hard, or like, they were going to have to expend too much political capital on it, and they would rather get something done like healthcare. It does feel pretty bleak for the Democrats. And we're now almost a year since the election, and it really doesn't feel, I mean, Gavin Newsom has tried and done okay, but like when you think about the primary debate stage, that's going to shape, kind of by the spring, 18 months from now, we're going to start having CNN and MSNBC, like Democratic presidential primary debates. We kind of know who's going to be up there, but like, who's going to catch fire? Who do you think is going to channel what the Democratic base is feeling and sort of be able to reach those people who maybe are Democratic leaning, but really feel like independents, or, the quote that you hear all the time, I didn't leave the Democrats, they left me. I know we've talked a little bit about like who is meeting the media environment well, but like in addition to maybe Newsom, who's going to be on that debate stage, and who do you think is going to be a real talent?
One person that it's funny because I don't know if he's capturing moderates, but I think he has a lot of respect in the MAGA world, is Ro Khanna. He's done more, and again, you said somebody who doesn't just do media. He's done more podcasts than anyone, any Democratic member of Congress. I mean, I saw the numbers like 1,600. I mean, something crazy.
Also, like a real tech brain. Like, he really understands tech.
He's a real tech brain, but
Silicon Valley guy.
He also has like the respect of people like Steve Bannon, who talks about his economic, thinking as like populism. And so I do think that there are people who are going to be seen as strong candidates who can work with, across the aisle on a couple issues.
Yeah.
Somebody like that I think is really interesting. But, again, these primary debates are frequently about viral moments. So there's going to be some gotcha moment and somebody rides that. But I think you're going to see, look, the obvious choices are people like Pete Buttigieg, who are amazing communicators. If she doesn't run for Senate, then AOC is going to make a bid for president. But the truth is that, she's deeply unpopular when you look at the whole scope of the American electorate. She's loved by, about a third, maybe, 40% of voters, but 60% don't like her. So there isn't an obvious choice right now. I mean, I'd ask you the question. Is there anybody that you think is?
I think that we will.
And is this where you announce that you're running?
No, but I love that we have some friends in LA who are toying with the idea, because now everyone's like, shit, I could do it. I do think that there's a real possibility that we have a Ross Perot moment in 2028, and that we have someone who is a serious third-party contender, who is self-funded, and who sort of is able to say, like, I reject MAGA, but I also am rejecting woke. Let's focus on, and maybe this person has a lot of cultural prestige. So, when you think... Are you
talking about Mark Cuban?
Well, I would say there are 10 people on that list.
Okay.
There's, The Rock. There's Matthew McConaughey. There's George Clooney. There's certainly, Mark Cuban. I don't know. I think, Howard Schultz tried. It didn't go great. I don't think Bob Iger could do it now after rolling over, after a 45-minute fight with the FCC. That was insane. But yeah, I do think, we have, there is something about Trump that I think people begrudgingly were like, the first term we were like, this guy's kind of an idiot. And now you're like, wow, there's real genius there's no strategy. There's no deeply held hardcore beliefs other than tariffs. Tariffs seems like the thing that he's really obsessed with, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But other than that, it's like he wants to be loved and liked. And he, is great at managing the news cycle and changing it when he wants to. Mm-hmm. There is no one better maybe ever at doing that. So, it's interesting sometimes to think about, well, like, what would be good for the country. And sometimes I think, like, wow, maybe if just for like 6 weeks we didn't make fun of him on TV, or like he could go to the Kennedy Center and everyone clapped and no one booed, and like, he could, like, liberals were just kind of being, yeah, you're great. Like, I wonder if he would like chill out and be normal. I'm not saying we should do that, But the psychology of him makes me think that above all, what he like the rage that boils through his blood every day is just driven by the fact that he can't handle that so many people who are like famous or cultural leaders in whatever sector think he's just like a tool.
Well, it sounds like you're saying that part of what drives him is, the pushback to him, and that pushes him to go, harder and more extreme. I think that there might be a strategy there. I mean, I think that does make sense. I think the other danger is that
I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying it's as a thought exercise. I actually think it would work. Yeah.
I think from like an attention media standpoint, absolutely. But then the risk is that you start to normalize this stuff. But then I would argue that it's already become normalized. We've been having these conversations for 8 years. Like this stuff is now normal and part of what we expect in our politics. And so I just don't see us turning the temperature down. The only thing that really could make an actual difference is if social media companies, and I include YouTube in that, totally change their algorithm.
Yeah,
and how that incentivizes things. Because really what we're seeing is, we're seeing it on a delay. Yeah. It's kind of like, how like light travels from a star, and it's like we're seeing it now, but it really is like we're seeing the light from a long time ago. We're seeing now what I think, people were getting angry about. Like it started many years ago.
Of course.
And so like the stuff that people are ingesting now, what is that going to lead to in 8 years?
Well, have you seen that thing about like if you sign up with like a dummy account on YouTube, you just like create an account and there's no cookies, like YouTube doesn't know who you are. It's on a new computer, new address, whatever. Within something like 12 videos, you're watching like extremism.
Yeah.
So yeah, they make money on it, and it's sucks, that they don't really care. And I don't think we should expect them to start caring.
But that seems like something that if, I'm not saying that they're going to, but that is clearly a nonpartisan, bipartisan thing, is like wanting to limit the extreme, fact or whatever force field pull among our social media, and wanting to limit that because we're starting to now see the results of that extreme behavior. It's turning into political assassinations, violence, and threats.
Yeah. Okay, so switching gears a little bit. Do you think this is a uniquely Donald Trump phenomenon? So like, let's say he does not somehow figure out how to run for a third term, and there's a primary, and it's
by the way, just to interrupt really quickly, he can technically run, he just cannot actually be elected to a third term. So you might see some, he announces that he's going to run and goes through like a media thing, but the Constitution, the 22nd Amendment is very clear, you can only be elected to 2 terms.
Right. And so let's see if he tries to run as JD Vance's vice president, and then tells JD Vance to resign 1 minute into his term. But is this so the idea that like basically the reason you see people in Congress doing nothing is because the cost of doing something is so high, right? So you saw Joni Ernst or Lisa Murkowski, anytime they've stood up to Trump on his nominees, on the big beautiful bill, anything, there's like not just that they're getting trounced on Fox, but they're getting like real death threats, like credible threats to their life. It's really scary. Does that go away when it's no longer Trump? Is there anyone else who can kind of cast a spell over the base like this? Or is it kind of like return to some type of normal where like if you do something truly illegal, even your own party is going to be like, no, you can't do that.
I think it will. Trump has this unique superpower in that he is arguably a sociopath. I mean, he has, or I shouldn't say that. He has no shame. He doesn't get embarrassed.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to hold people to account and expect them to not do something, because shame and embarrassment is like a natural intrinsic check. And he doesn't have that check. Yeah. And so he'll go to the mat. He'll go as far as, it's a game of chicken all the time. And so I don't see anybody else who has that complete lack of shame, but who also has like massive amounts of charisma.
Yeah.
And then I talk about this with my comedian friends all the time.
He's funny.
He's hilarious.
Yeah.
He's truly, like, his timing is funny. His delivery is funny. Everything about him, like, he's funny. And so I think that makes a lot of his extreme ideas more palatable. It's sort of just like, a middle finger at the establishment, or it almost makes it seem not serious when it is very serious.
One of my favorite examples to give about just how unique this guy is like, can you imagine if when Barack Obama was president, there were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times when he was walking out of the White House to Marine One to be, choppered off to something, and he goes to grab the hand of Michelle Obama and she slaps it away. I truly believe that the Republicans would have been like, he's abusing her, you resign now. I mean, that's fucking crazy. Like, the first lady, the wife of the president, regularly, every time he tries to show her any affection in public, she pushes him away. And it's like so like all of the norms.
In her defense, his hands are like nasty.
But isn't it just crazy to think about that? Like, so like, yes, the norms that are being broken for the Constitution, but also just in terms of like presidential behavior and demeanor, like they really do kind of love that this guy is like a dick.
Yeah, because he's their dick.
Yeah, totally.
And I mean that literally. He like he captures there for, again, I do think it goes back to like that moment in 2008, 2009 with the financial crisis where it's like, okay, people who are at the top of the food chain can get away with it all. So they kind of want to, I understand the appeal of wanting to throw a metaphorical grenade into the halls of the system and shake things up. It's like payback.
But unfortunately, it didn't shake it up. It made everything much more corrupt.
Correct.
Couple more questions and then I'll let you go. Why do you think that on the left we pay more of a price for like the whack jobs on Twitter? So I think about this a lot. Like, you don't really have senior elected officials who are Democrats who are in office saying really woke things, right? Or saying encouraging political violence. So when the assassination of Charlie Kirk happened a few weeks ago, I didn't see any true person that you could identify as a leader of the left, a Democratic Party leader in office or culturally celebrating it, saying they were happy about it. I saw universal denouncement. Like, this is bad. This is awful. We feel sorry for his family. This shouldn't have happened. It's too easy to get guns in this country. We are too violent in this country. We have to call for an end to political violence. And also people saying, this happened to him. It happened to these poor elected officials in Minnesota. Paul Pelosi, an attempted assassination of Donald Trump, too. Mm-hmm. So, but
Josh Shapiro. I mean, there's tons of examples,
but on the right, they're sort of talking about how like the left is celebrating this, and so, why do you think? And meanwhile, they're able to very easily, I think, like disown like the fringes on their side, and not have to answer for them. So like, why do you think we have to sort of like answer for like the wackos on our side?
I think it's a simple PR strategy. And the strategy is to take the most extreme example or examples of your opponent and paint it as the entirety.
Right.
And that is just a tactic. And also,
but why don't we do it then?
I mean, to be honest, it goes back to my point about the creator economy. It's like you see a massive amount of coordination on the right between online social media personalities, media figures, hosts, and there's coordination. Also, part of what's the big underlying problem for all of this is that there is no federal law or policy requiring influencers to disclose when they're being paid by super PACs or political campaigns. Mm-hmm. So a lot of your news personalities, sorry to say, are being paid and they're not telling you.
Yeah.
So, and they're being paid by PACs and campaigns.
Yeah.
And it's a strategy. And so the strategy is to take the most extreme examples on the left, paint it with the brush that these are not exemptions from the left. They're not extremes. This is what the left has become. And that is a tactic. And they just hammer it home and home and home. They take, video. And then that's honestly why, Charlie Kirk was so effective. He would have, these, a lot of people would ask him questions and there'd be like a myriad of, normal questions, but he'd take, the most unconventional looking person with like tons of piercings and hair, crazy hair, and, that would be the clip that they amplify. And he would do this over and over. He would take a few, examples and try to pretend that this is, it's a straw man. It's a boogeyman.
Right. So like, if it's very effective though, like if you would have thought that like Vice President Harris's number one policy position was like, I'm running for president to provide gender
Trans people with
reassignment
sex change,
surgeries
yeah.
who are only for people in prison. I mean, we got to figure this out on our side. I want to close with some, obviously after the terrible assassination of Charlie Kirk, like the dominant news story has been Jimmy Kimmel being suspended and just the different ways that people are ingesting that and seeing that. I do think that the average person on the right was uncomfortable with how that went down. And even if it personally felt good to them, they're like, this could happen to someone on our side too. If it's that easy, if someone says something you don't like and then they get their show taken away or they get fired or like kind of canceled, it does sort of feel unfair. And so I saw a lot of people in my life kind of acknowledging that, right? They're very MAGA Trump people. It felt good to them to see Jimmy Kimmel, who's someone that they loathe, get hit kind of a comeuppance. But in order to they would like give a little bit, take a, and so something I heard commonly was, okay, yeah, like maybe they shouldn't have done that. Or even if he's going to lose a show, that probably wasn't the right process. Like having the president sort of like get his FCC attack dog to sick, on ABC Disney. But what about the Biden folks, Mark Zuckerberg saying, when at the height of COVID, senior Biden administration officials would call us and tell us to take this down, and they were censoring stuff. And you hear creators on the right saying, I just got this put back on YouTube after the Biden administration got it taken down. Do you think that we have a free speech problem on our side too? Do you think that there is any equivalency there? How do you view that argument on the right?
So I think there's a very clear line that delineates what the Biden administration did from what Trump's FCC did. And it's that there's a difference between pressure and coercion. Mm-hmm. Pressure was applied during COVID. I mean, Zuckerberg testified in Congress that the Biden administration pressured him to remove posts or restrict speech. But that pressure amounted to emails,
right,
and phone calls and conversations and stern asking.
And at no time did they say, we're going to shut down Facebook, make it illegal for you to operate, delete you from the App Store.
We're not going to take away your business license. We're not going to take away, any sort of, we're not going to block any mergers that are coming up as a penalty for that. So the administration did put pressure on Facebook. And the thing that's tough with COVID is that, information that was thought to be true at the time, comes out, some of it is not true. And so in hindsight, it looks like, they're trying to lie or cover up when it's just, this is a new disease. We don't have all the information. The government will be wrong about some stuff. That's as anyone will. That's just how science works. So I do think that there is, while it is not okay for the government to, sternly ask and put pressure on, there was no penalty for Mark Zuckerberg if he didn't listen. In fact, he even at the time, the reporting, or when he testified in front of Congress, he said Biden officials were upset and were throwing up their hands, flustered, which is very emblematic of the Democratic Party, of like just being upset when you don't get your way politely, and not having the pressure to actually get what you want. So I think that they walked up to the line, whereas Trump's FCC saying, if you don't do this, we are going to potentially take away ABC's broadcast license. We may not approve the merger, Sinclair and Tegna, or Nexstar and Tegna. If maybe local affiliates should be more judicious in what they carry if they want, if they know what's best for them. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Those are clear threats.
That's like something Tony Soprano would say.
100%.
Yeah.
And so that crosses the line. If the government is threatening punishment if a company in the private sector does not restrict speech, that is crossing the line, versus the government just sternly asking you to do that, and you can ignore them and there's no consequences.
Thank you. Anything else you want to talk about?
I want to talk about how much I admire you. And your work. You said some very nice things about me at the top, but I want to say, and I'm sure your listeners agree, that you have a really, amazing mind, and you really are down to have conversations with people you don't agree with, and you distill things in a really approachable way. And, I really do look to you as a thought leader when it comes to anything politics and culture.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate that. You have a lot coming up. I mean, I mentioned your book. What does the Constitution really
What does the Constitution actually say?
Actually say. There's an adult version and a kids version, and the kids version is really cool. You have your PBS show.
Civics Made Easy. Yep.
Can people stream that? Is it?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. It's on PBS's YouTube channel. It's on the PBS app, wherever you get that, and it's on PBS's website. And 7 episodes are out as of this recording, and there are 12 total, and they come out every 2 weeks.
And you have a Substack?
Substack, Politics Made Easy, yep.
And you're most prolific on Instagram at Ben Sheehan, Sheehan.
That is correct.
Thank you. I love you.
I love you too.